She may only be a little girl, but don't turn your back if you want to survive. I hesitate to tell this story because it is too unreal to believe and unsettling to hear, especially if you are a devout Catholic as I am. If you are religious, choose another story. This story may be troubling. This event happened several years ago. It never made the papers or any news as it was hushed up by the hospital administrators as it was a child that was at the heart of this frightful incident. But I was there. Here is my story. I was a recent hire as night security at an office building in a suburb of Chicago. I worked the entry desk from 11 until 7 in the morning. The building was available to employees of the firm 24/7 with a passkey. However, very few accessed the building after 10, so I seldom, if ever, saw anyone enter or leave the building. While the building is in the suburbs of Chicago, it was still in a remote location surrounded by a large wood. The building was secluded and at night was spooky on its own. Unsurprisingly, few of the firm employees came into work during the off hours. Sitting in the front glass entry all night alone really creeped me out. But the job was easy money, and for a security job and pretty low risk, it wasn't a building or firm that dealt with cash or jewelry or anything of that nature. It was just offices for employees administrating a large firm's day-to-day business activities. But its location out of sight from the town was eerie and lonely at night. Yet I needed the work and was desperate to find anything that would pay my new family's bills. I was only recently married and with a child on the way. When I started, I was given basic training and instructions and taught all the security procedures necessary to safeguard the building and the people who worked there. The building was large with many exits but only one entrance. There was a large loading dock for trucks to bring things like furniture and supplies, including the employee cafeteria and trash removal. There was a room for security camera control and security systems to be housed. The building was an electronic Fort Knox with motion detectors and alarms extending into the wood, driveway, and parking garage. After I completed my training, I was scheduled for my first night of work alone. I was paired with another security officer during the training week, so at least someone to chat with. On the first night of my schedule, I arrived and relieved the officer on duty at 11, and he told me there were still a handful of people still in the building. They all departed shortly after by 11:15. I did a patrol, checking all the exits and loading bay doors and checking that all security cameras and sensors were functioning in the security center. All lights were green and all cameras recording. I walked each corridor on each floor, and indeed, the building was vacant of all employees. I went down to the main entry where my desk was, double-checked the motion detectors and alarms, and set each for night surveillance. They monitored every door, outside grounds, and each corridor on each floor. Just before midnight, a corridor alarm went off on the control panel. This is the first time this has happened to me. I never had any alarms signaled during training. So this set me on edge. I followed the procedure and informed the security company. We called the mothership. We were to do this before we took any action. I told them I was responding to an internal alarm on the 3rd floor and would call them back after investigating. This way, if I did not call, they would send a police unit to check on me as a precaution. I went up to 3 and patrolled with my flashlight, walking the entire corridor, and found nothing unusual and no one left on the floor by mistake. I took the stairway to the lobby security desk and reported a false alarm. Well, within the hour, an alarm flashed again on the panel. I again followed the procedure and investigated, finding nothing. I reset the alarm and settled back into my chair, only to have it a 3rd time trigger. For a 3rd time, I went to 3 and found nothing. This was playing with my nerves now. I calmed myself, saying it was probably a sensor and I'll report it to be repaired in the morning. So when the alarm went off for a 4th time, I didn't bother to inform the mothership. I was too afraid that they would think I was a coward alone on my first night. I grabbed my flashlight as in the previous alarms. I returned to 3 to confirm that it was just an electronic problem with the system and nothing more. And like the previous times, I found nothing. But this time, I wanted to prove it was a faulty sensor. So I turned off my flashlight and stood motionless in the dark, listening and waiting for the alarm to flash again. Within a minute, I felt more movement than seeing anything in the dark. It was a whisper of sound I heard. It was very quiet, but distinctly a rustling of motion, like a cat or something running. My hand gripped my metal maglite that was my only weapon. My heart was racing. I have never had an encounter with an intruder before. Someone was on the 3rd floor. I switched on the flashlight and called out, "Who goes there? Show yourself. This is security." There was no response, only a deafening silence. I swept the corridor with the light beam and nothing. I moved slowly forward, holding my flashlight like a Glock 19 gripped in 2 hands. Halfway down the hall, I saw a conference room door ajar. I crept next to it and, without thinking to contact the mothership, burst in like a single-man SWAT team, swinging my flashlight beam until it froze on a figure huddled at the center of the conference table. I was shocked. It was a little girl about 13, dressed in a dirty nightgown. She was sitting with her knees up, held by her arms. Her feet were filthy and barefoot. Her hair was a tangled mess draped over her eyes. It was her eyes that terrified me. They literally burned right through me. I could feel only hatred and anger beyond comprehension. Her arms wrapped like wreathing snakes about her legs. One hand grotesquely twisted around a metal cross about 12 inches long, held out front. Her face had no emotion, as if she did not see me. I tried calming myself and said, "It's all right, give me your hand. I'm here to help." The girl swayed agitatedly and croaked in a voice well beyond her years, "Christ died for you, and now you will die for him." The words came in a blistering heat of rage, and before they were out of her mouth, she sprung like a leopard, and the cross swung down on me like a dagger. It tore through my uniform, cutting a long streak across my chest. I rolled, pushing her aside, and regained my feet. She faced me off, clutching the cross and again saying, "Christ died for you, and now you will die for him." The energy with which she spoke was electric. There was destruction in every syllable, dripping with malice. I have never been so fearful for my life. It was a little girl, and not a little girl, but something genuinely evil. She blocked me from the door and stalked me like a prey animal as I backstepped around the conference room table. As I circled the table again, I was at the door and I pulled it shut and barred it with a chair to hold her inside. I raced to the lobby and called for backup, shouting, "Intruder in the building!" I described the little girl I had trapped in the conference room to the officers responding, and they said they had a bulletin of a young girl missing from the mental health facility 2 towns over. She was to be considered extremely dangerous and not to be approached. He called the hotline, and a special medical unit, especially trained, arrived on the scene. It is still a mystery how she escaped without notice from the psychiatric hospital where she had been living for several years. No one can figure out how she traveled barefoot through 2 towns in a nightgown and through a wood to the office building, and how and when she got inside. A review of the security camera footage revealed nothing. What little of the story I could piece together was that she was from a very religious family who treated her as an abomination because she was conceived by rape. One night she killed her father, then her mother, and lastly her baby sister with a cross taken from the family home altar. She had stabbed them multiple times. I had drifted away from Catholicism, but this chilling nightmare night alone brought me back to the church. I know there is evil in the world, and that I have met the spawn of Satan. The night is no place for children alone. Who knows what evil comes lurking? I will never forget, nor can I escape, the nightmare that replays when I close my eyes to sleep. I live in Kenosha, Wisconsin. This misfortune happened when I was 14 and my little sister was 8. Dad drove long haul and was gone several days at a time. Often it was a week or more on the road before we would see him. Mom worked at the diner on a rotating shift, working the night shift every other week. They tried to coordinate so that at least one would be home with us kids at night, but it didn't always work out. For the most part, our neighborhood is a typical American neighborhood. It is a quiet street lined with similar houses, primarily built in the 1950s. Some a little earlier and some a little later, but all typical 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, 1 car garage, and a fenced yard big enough for a dog. But we didn't have a dog or cat because my little sister had fur allergies. Well, Dad was on a cross-country haul somewhere in Minnesota, and Mom was called in for a night shift she couldn't get out of because of low staffing. I said we didn't need a babysitter because I was old enough to watch Annabelle. I could get her to bed and we would watch a TV show and play video games. I remember putting up an actual argument to have this responsibility. I made all kinds of promises, and Mom reluctantly agreed. She said it was almost impossible to find a sitter on short notice, and even though I was young, she trusted my judgment. As she left for work, it was snowing and dark since 4:30, which was typical for Kenosha in December. An inch was on the ground and the forecast was for 3. Annabelle and I watched Disney until 10, when I helped her organize her stuffed animals for bed. She is no trouble at all. She is gentle and quiet and loves her pets, as she calls them, snugly around her when she sleeps. I turned out the light and shut the door, leaving just a crack, as Mom always does, and went to the living room to play Fortnite, a complete addiction for me. At about 11, Annabelle came and touched my shoulder. She was carrying one of her pets, and she snuggled up next to me and said, "I'm scared." "Why are you scared, Annabelle? You should be asleep. There is someone outside my window who keeps knocking." I reassured her that no one was out on such a wintry night, and it was probably just that tree knocking against the window in the wind. "Go back to bed and I'll check on you after this round of Fortnite." She returned to her room, crawled up into her bed, and pulled the comforter over her head. In a short while, I checked on her, and she was asleep. I went to the window to see if the wind was pushing the tree branches against the window, and it wasn't. I was looking out at the wintry weather when I noticed big boot prints in the snow leading to the window and then leading away, heading to the neighbor's house. I thought that weird, but since no one was there and the tracks indicated whomever it was had left, I didn't let it concern me very much, and I went to my room to sleep, leaving the door cracked. After midnight, I woke and was thirsty, so I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. I noticed in the hall that the house was freezing, with winter air blowing in. I went into the kitchen and instantly saw the back door was open. I thought, whoa, the wind must be powerful tonight, and I didn't lock the door, and I went over to close it. But as I approached, I saw big, wet, and snowy boot prints that came in and trailed into the house. I grabbed the giant butcher knife of my dad's from the knife block. It was all that I could think of for protection. I stealthily followed the prints that led to Annabelle's room. The door was open, and I had left it a crack. I whispered Annabelle. A terrible, deep laugh came from the darkened room. It shook me to my core. I flipped on the light switch, and Annabelle shrieked louder than anything I had ever heard from her. Above her stood a tall man in a circus clown suit and a painted face with painted tears and a frown that was so terrifying I froze and could not breathe. He looked straight at me and said, "Hey kid, do you want to play?" I said, "Play with this," and charged at him, running around the end of my sister's bed with a butcher knife. The dreadful clown jumped on my sister's bed and bounded out the door. I slammed the bedroom door, locked it, took a chair, and put it under the doorknob. We both sat on her bed, huddled together. Annabelle was crying, "I want Mommy." We stayed locked until morning when we heard Mom come into the house. The back door was still open, but all the tracks in the backyard had been covered in fresh snow, and the prints in the house had melted into puddles. There was no trace of the frightening clown. Mom called the police and they came. They had no other reports or sightings of a clown anywhere in Kenosha that night, so the case was dead. I don't know what would have happened to my sister that night if I had not awakened for a glass of water. This chilling nightmare never ends for me. I can't close my eyes without seeing that clown leering at me and hearing that voice. "Hey kid, do you want to play?" Belvedere and Marin County considered the use of federal snipers to kill all the coyotes in the city. It's not a headline you want to read in the city you have just moved. I'm a 23-year-old nurse who had just moved to Belvedere, California, after graduation from nursing school. It was a great opportunity and I would be in an area of the country I wanted to live. It was across the Golden Gate Bridge to San Francisco. The redwoods are not far, and the famous Marin County wine region is at the doorstep. I love to walk, hike, and explore. I love the great outdoors and the Pacific Ocean. I'm an avid runner and health nut. Belvedere held my heart. I was so excited to begin my nursing career here. My dog Molly came with me and seems to love Belvedere too. I'm able to give her a little more room to run. She's an old dog. She's been with me for 10 years. We are best friends. We do everything together. After all the move-in, it was already after sunset, and I had gotten my stuff put away in the new apartment. But Molly needed some exercise, and so did I. I grabbed her leash just in case we encountered anyone else with a dog, but I didn't put it on Molly. She is excellent and stays by my side when I run. I have to go a little slower for her now as she favors her left front paw because of arthritis. I let Molly lead this evening as I didn't know the area and figured she would find the places she liked. She has a natural instinct for good trails. As the sun set, it was beautiful, and we found a great trail through a reserve and rolling hills. But as darkness descended, I realized I hadn't paid much attention to the direction we had taken. We came out of the reserve onto an unfamiliar road. I had no idea as to the road home. Molly was limping pretty badly and stopped and began to growl. She never growls, but she had her teeth bared and a low, forbidding rumble came from her throat. I said, "What's the problem, girl? What's up?" She didn't even look at me, but lowered her body in a front pose, with legs spread defensively, her growl more intense. I was frightened and said, "Come girl, come with me," and we both turned and ran down the road toward the house lights. In seconds, howling and barking surrounded us. A big black coyote came out of nowhere, and 6 others followed. All I could see were their eyes reflected in the low moonlight. Molly went into a fast defensive and charged the big coyote, and a terrible fight ensued. The other coyotes gathered around the fighting animals, leaving me alone. I knew if I stayed, I would be next. Molly was doing what she knew by her nature. I backed away slowly and headed for the lights. At the front door of the first house, I pounded on the door and yelled, "Please help!" and an elderly man opened it and asked what the trouble was. I said coyotes attacked me and my dog up the street. In a second, he had a rifle and headed toward the wild barking. For an old guy, he ran with great speed. A minute later, 3 shots rang out, and all sounds stopped. When I got up next to him, he was kneeling on the side of the road with his hands on Molly. He said, "She's hurt badly. We're gonna need a vet." 3 hours later, Molly was out of surgery. The vet said, with rest and care, she will survive. Molly saved your life tonight. It's been a few years since this incident, and Molly is just as loving as ever. I don't venture out alone at night anymore. The coyote problem keeps expanding closer into the neighborhoods, and they are more aggressive and attack dogs, cats, and people. I'm so thankful during my worst chilling nightmare out alone at night. I had a great dog by my side.